looking for extraterrestrial space aliens among us. At this writing, there are 2 years left in the second millennium. Was written before 2000, this article. So perhaps it's appropriate to examine and compare from a ufological point of view the events of the 80s and the current decade. An important point that emerges from the study and comparison is the fact that the wall of silence, as the dean of ufologists brilliantly called the reluctance of witnesses to disclose their experiences of UFOs and extraterrestrials, has noticeably receded, and this, as is self-evident, also significantly facilitates research in areas of Europe, for example. This fact, which is not accidental, is greatly contributed by the reflection on this issue by the various mass media, printed and electronic, with reports or articles which are sometimes positive or even in rare cases negative. The information provided today is unprecedented, and it's remarkable that for the past year, almost every month, there have been various related articles in both newspapers and magazines. But the contribution of the electronic press is also important because it enables various researchers to correctly and objectively inform the public about the phenomenon of UFOs, but also to engage in a public dialogue with scientists who deny this phenomenon. We should not lose sight of the fact that the topic sells, as it's called in the journalistic arena, and the shows that present it catch high ratings. All this has the positive effect that witnesses today have the possibility to give their testimonies to investigators without fear of being ridiculed or thought to be delusional. It's remarkable that some witnesses have the courage to describe their experiences personally in the media and especially on television, which was completely unthinkable in the 1980s. This, as is self-evident, causes a positive effect for the phenomenon of UFOs in the subconscious of people, with the consequence that they change their position towards this issue. It's indicative that, especially in recent years, there has been an increase in the production of science fiction films, as well as the various books related to UFOs and aliens. A major difference between the 1980s and 90s is the abductions, the kidnappings, which in the current decade have increased significantly compared to the previous decade. It's noteworthy that abductees are given a memory barrier and religious type performances, hence performances in which the abductee thinks they have met God, angels or saints. In these cases, and in others where the memory is blocked, quote unquote, either by the third-party submissions and mechanisms or by reasons of subconscious self-defense to maintain mental balance. Relaxation and the attempt to retroactive hypnosis are the means of release, the success of which the course scales from case to case and definitely requires persistence and repetition. I have noticed that after abductions, people who have been abducted take an unprecedented turn to metaphysical reflections. One feels a different person and feels a special emotion by reading the Bible, as well as books that have to do with the search for answers to the great questions of the human soul. He can also change his lifestyle by reading books about ancients or ancient Greek texts, for example, authors, and devote several hours every day to this purpose. However, the point that must be highlighted and emphasized is the rare and at the same time paradoxical fact that at the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 90s, the most important by today's standards the events took place. Another notable difference is that in the 1980s there was a quantitative difference, that is, there were more UFO sightings, while in the 90s the difference is qualitative. The 80s closed with a big wave flap of viewings. For the first time in the year, we have saw so many viewings all over, for example, Greece. In the same year, the most important ufological event of the decade occurred at 8:15 on the morning of Thursday, July 29, 1989, in the village of Chrysopetra in northern Greece, Kilkis. According to the testimony of 11-year-old Evi Sotiropoulos, a huge white cloud came down. Now we notice that even in the ancient Greek texts, many events show that the UFOs were camouflaged as clouds. So she said, a huge white cloud came down. in which the outline of the supernatural large human-shaped being could be seen, which was taller than the house. He was 3 or 4 meters tall. He had arms, while he seemed to have broken legs. The landing was accompanied by a deafening noise, something like an explosion, which was heard by others in the village, and it shook their houses. This creature also left its tracks. 2 footprints, 1.10 long and 60 wide, at a depth of 2.5 centimeters in the ground. It should be noted that the incident began with a powerful explosion. At the beginning of the 1990s, the incident of Atalanti happened. That's near Corinth of Greece, on February 9. That night, hundreds of witnesses saw 12 or 13 UFOs, one behind the other. In other words, it was a fleet of UFOs. They were crossing the airspace of Greece from northern Greece, Macedonia, up to the Peloponnese, below Corinth, where they turned around and followed a reverse course. But as they approached the middle of Greece, Lamia, one of them that was on fire landed in the area of Atalanti. Where 2 others soon landed, apparently for safety reasons. So these are, one of the UFOs was burning up and the others landed for safety reasons. This incident was watched from a distance of 600 meters by the Karatrandu family, and Mrs. Karatrandu said the following: "The moon had risen and I could see them clearly. Where they landed formed a circle and brightly illuminated the area around the large one. They seemed to have formed a wall that prevented the fire from spreading. Further, there were reeds that could spread the fire onto the pines. From what was seen in the morning, something had been dropped because the place was damp and the reeds were sticking. They were sticky. We stood and watched. My husband was afraid they might be coming our way. He grabbed the double barrel and moved towards them to get a better look. The shotgun. He grabbed his shotgun. With his shotgun, he was going towards them to get a better look at them. Some shadows were seen passing in front of the burning object, but you could not tell if they were people or something else. They were doing something within the circle of light they had formed around the large object. The items remained there from about 10 p.m. on Sunday until 3 a.m. on Monday. In the morning, there was only a little smoke, and my brother, who went to the area where the big one had fallen, found some mechanical parts and a spongy material. Next to the crash site was a pine tree with the trunk burned low. My brother caught the pine and small blisters appeared on his body as if he had been burned. In the landing area, there were circular holes in the ground that appeared to be made by a drill, with mounds of soil around them, the rim of each hole. A part that my brother found and handed over to the authorities had a mark engraving on it, a circle with 2 diametrically opposed antennae, which had a shape like a lightning bolt in it. The second important event happened on August 14, 1995, in the area of St. Stephen in Attica. That's about a half an hour ride north of Athens. Ayos Stephanos in Attica, and the relevant testimony comes from Thodoros Paparotzis, who said that after a knock he saw in front of him a being which was a humanoid. The legs were very large, reaching about the middle of my chest, he said, and the hair on his legs was thick. His face was white to pink, his eyes were blue. His body had no neck, and his head seemed to be attached to his small body. He was about 2.5 meters tall, and I raised my head to observe him better. I think he was wearing something fitted that looked like a tunic, and it came down to his thigh. I heard him whisper something to me, apparently in his own dialect, and I asked him what he wanted. He made the shape of the tank for me with his hands. Tank? No, not a tank. Like what would we call it? A tank that holds like water or, heating oil, okay? He made the shape of a tank for me with his hands. I answered him that there is no reservoir here, and that there is one on the hill of St. Demetrius. Then he explained to me that he was looking for the tank that is in Panagia, in other words, the Virgin Mary. I understood then that he was looking for the reservoir that exists in the community of the spring, and I indicated to him what path he should follow to get there. But suddenly I lost sight of him as if he had dematerialized. The third incident took place on Easter Day, 1996, at 2355 in the village of Corfu, Potamos Corfu. That's on the west side of Greece, towards Italy. The island of Corfu, and was witnessed by most of the village's residents. That evening, the couple Costa and Marina Perulis were going to their house on the outskirts of the above village. So it was around midnight of Easter Day. The weather was relatively good, just stuffy and drizzly, nothing to foreshadow the UFO incursions and the events that followed. As they approached their house, they heard a loud hum, which sounded like an airplane turbine. Because they thought it was a storm that would hit the area, they quickened their pace and soon reached the yard of their home. And there they were surprised to notice their cat making sudden convulsive movements and fearfully leaving the yard, even though she had recently given birth. This was the first indication that something unnatural was happening, as pets are known to love their young and never leave them. This event was also the first living testimony to the presence of UFOs, because as we know today, animals react in exactly this way to the presence of a UFO. The atmosphere was so highly ionized and the agitation of the Perulis so great that they could not put the key in the lock and open their door. They then noticed 4 sphere-shaped objects with a red color passing over the area at an initial height of about 200 meters, which gradually decreased to 150 before soon returning to 200 meters and finally moving away at high speed. But their passage over the village of Potamos caused many and varied disasters, especially where they descended to 150 meters, that only a severe storm could cause. Several branches were cut off from many trees were uprooted, roofs of houses were destroyed. It was noteworthy that this phenomenon was also dealt with by the local mass media, which proves the seriousness of the phenomenon. Times are changing in the world. The world is now taking all these incidents more seriously, which, as you have seen, various UFO events and extraterrestrial sightings in Greece as well. Already the study done on all this is huge and, of course, often results in interesting conclusions, which have started to find their way to the public. Underground alien base. The time was 3:30 a.m., October 12, 1980, when the persistent ringing of the telephone woke up North Carolina resident Donovan Masters, who was urged by a friend to get dressed, leave his house, and observe a strange flying light which was heading towards his area. This is 3:30 in the morning, October 12, 1980. Donovan got out of bed, hurried, dressed, and left his house. Let's remember, North Carolina, I've been, my sister used to live there in North Carolina. Beautiful place, beautiful fireflies in the summer, beautiful, and of course, not very populated. So Donovan got out of bed, hurried, dressed, and left his house. As he searched the sky, he noticed a strange object which was heading towards his house. Because the object was small in size and flying very low among the trees, he decided to move and change his position to observe it better. As he drove, he kept watching the ever-growing object. When Donovan reached the nearby intersection, he stopped the car, got out, and watched as the object continued to grow and head towards him. After a few minutes, the flying light stopped directly in front of him, and as he observed it, it was a white and bright object about the size of a large grapefruit and seemed to be hanging from the sky. As he observed this, he was overcome with a feeling of safety and warmth and felt as if small electrical discharges were going through his body, passing through his head in waves, running through his whole body and coming out from the tips of his toes. As he noticed out of the corners of his eyes, 2 more bright objects were approaching him, which were smaller than the first, They had red and white lights, and their movement was like a coin falling to the floor. One of the two objects, which was to his right, flew and sat on top of the large object, and as he noticed, none of the three objects made any sounds. Then he thought he should photograph them. He went home, took his camera, quickly returned to the place where the three objects were, but they had already disappeared. After a few months, in February of 1991, his wife, who had moved to a nearby town, had an unexpected encounter on the street where a strange man dressed in black approached her, and the following conversation took place. "Are you Donovan Masters' wife?" "Yes," she said. "Has he ever revealed to you that he believes he is from another planet?" "Yes, he has spoken to me, but how do you know that?" "This is not about you. Do you know your husband is crazy?" "Of course not," she said, "but something else might be going on." After this dialogue, MIB, Men in Black, revealed to her many facts about her husband that naturally only he should know, and their conversation ended with MIB's following statement: "Your husband is not crazy. The downside is that many of the creatures in your world cannot understand his intelligence. Please tell him that he will learn everything when the time is right for him." Then the man said goodbye to her and left, and she never saw him again. When Donovan's wife returned home, she told her husband about her encounter with a mysterious stranger and what was said at the encounter. Donovan felt mixed emotions wash over him, coming from wondering how the mysterious stranger knew so much about him and confirming his belief that he came from another world, from another abduction. Donovan, along with three friends, ended up in an underground base for the aliens. As he recalls, he had the strange feeling that time was moving in slow motion, as if he had been drugged. They were placed in and handcuffed onto a conveyor belt, which was activated, and as it moved, their bodies passed through cubes of intense bread. These light cubes, which were probably laser detecting devices, were green or blue, and each cube had a robot operator that was the same color as the cube. The robots were humanoid, but without any outward human features. In the first room, all along the wall, there were barrels containing some substance which gave off a very pungent odor, and one barrel was placed on top of another. Suddenly they found themselves in a different one, filmed or at the end of the first, because as the moving film moved around the circular console, it stopped. There were two humanoid beings, one of which looked something like a razor and shaved an area on his lower right back just below his waist, which had been bleeding for some time. He remembers constantly thinking about what all the above events meant. He was then telepathically contacted by one of the aliens, who explained that he had just been implanted with his government control number, which is 04. With considerable irritation, he turned to a uniformed woman to whom he shouted, "You have no right to give me that to do this." Then he ran back to the console where he was allowed to leave. The two men who were on the console were hurriedly gathering various material, probably to leave. The man who had implanted the number was holding a list, which had just come off the computer. He and his friends then tried to chase after him and the other humanoid, but managed to escape through a double door. He then escaped the base, not remembering how he did it. Since then, he has been intensely tormented by various dreams in which he has encounters and communications with beings that seem otherworldly and non-human. He is still tormented by intense insomnia, but also by the fear that something negative will happen to him if he falls asleep. In another of his abductions, he remembers walking down a circular corridor, and when he came across an open door, he stepped inside and saw a woman lying on a medical bed. This woman was surrounded by gray aliens who were 3.5 meters to 4 meters tall, and wore clingy work overalls which fitted them like a second skin. He was then told telepathically that he must not enter the room again or attempt to contact Krista again, as the woman on the medical table was called. He was then escorted out into the hallway, where suddenly everything went dark around him and he passed out. Although he tried several times to remember what happened next, in this abduction of his, he could not remember. Donovan was abducted for the last time on the night March 31st, 1984, and was taken to a UFO and underwent another medical examination. The only incident he remembers from his abduction of his is that he saw on his left a young blonde man who was standing there with tears in his eyes. After some time, Donovan telepathically heard the leader of the aliens order the young man to leave. After his last kidnapping, Donovan noticed after a few weeks a strange black car following him everywhere. His driver posed as a government agent and terrorized the neighborhood. In a small community like Ebert, North Carolina, the residents know each other and learn immediately what happens. Men in black never approached Donovan but parked his car across the street from Donovan's trailer, where he waited for him to exit the house, so he followed him wherever he went. But in addition to men in black, black helicopters with no insignia began to fly low over his caravan. In the following months, he began to feel very weak and fear for his life. As has happened in other similar cases, Donovan turned to God, hoping that he could deal with the events that were happening. As Donovan believes, the gray aliens must be a cross between biological tissues and advanced electronic technology, or staborgs. As for aliens in human form, he believes we are their descendants from thousands of years ago. These experiences of Donovan's, as well as his obsession with remembering the various events that happened, resulted in the dissolution of his marriage. But this fact did not affect Donovan, who now lives alone and, as he says, feels happy. And this is from Socrates Ekaterinidis from his books Extraterrestrial Beings in Greece, where he talks about the most serious cases of UFO sightings in Greece, comparing our time in the recent past, when if anyone was looking for flying saucers and extraterrestrials, everyone made fun of him. And this I've translated for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.